What's the craziest thing you've ever seen as an emergency medicine physician?
The craziest thing that I've ever seen as emergency medicine physician probably is more of a personal thing. I can remember a busy trauma night about 2 a.m. I get off at 2 a.m., so I'm literally signing out. I've already signed out. I'm walking out the front door of our ER on Chicago South Side, and literally I see one of my closest friends in the world who I hadn't seen in about a couple years come through the door, blood shooting out of his eye, head, and he's like, "Yo," he's like, "I've been shot in the head. Somebody saved my life." And the craziest thing about this situation is that so now I'm coming back, throwing my coat off, coming back to the trauma bay, and literally the entire thing happens, shot through the eye, out right by the ear. But as we're getting him to the CT to make sure he doesn't have internal bleeding in his brain, he's like, "Man, yo, D, I love you, bro. Like, don't let me die. I so love you." And my staff at this time, I respond to him like, "Hey, man, bro, I love you as well. We gonna get you through this. I promise you." After he gets to CT, my staff is like in tears, and they're like, Dr. Pratt, you're just so gracious that you told that young man that you were able to connect in this quick moment, and they're giving you flowers." I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. That's literally one of my best friends in the world. I literally love this dude. The last time I saw him was doing violence prevention on Chicago South Side. So for him to be shot coming in at 2 in the morning, they were like even more in tears after that. But that's a common occurrence to some degree here on Chicago South Side when you grow up in these communities and then you become a physician serving them.
Doggone, man. We just gonna start this episode off like that. Oh, man, well, all right. Before we dive in there, let me do quick introduction. So, what is up? What is up, fam? It's Dr. Dale, your boy, founder of Black Men and White Coast. This is the Black Men and White Coast podcast. This has been a minute, man. We've been out the pocket for a minute, but we're getting back in things. Super excited about this guest today. It's my guy from man. It's been a few years now, and we'll talk about some of that stuff. And I was just saying before we started recording, man. Like last time I saw you, I think you still had your hair was a lot bigger, man.
Yeah, man. No, no, man. As we grow, we mature. We develop. New things, new day. But as black men in medicine, it's something that our youth keep us young. Our youth keep us, on what's really in, what's popping in the streets. So, it's just good to be here. Last time I was with your brother, and that was wonderful. And so to be here with you, man, it's truly an honor that I do not take for granted.
All right, man. All right. Well, today we've got Dr. Abdullah Pratt, Dr. D. Dola. Man, super excited. He's an amazing young man, and y'all gonna see that on this episode here. And I got some good conversation topics here that we're gonna dive into. It's from the South Side of Chicago. I'm not gonna give it all away because we're gonna talk about it. But let's kick it off with this question. So, when you first got that white coat, the long white coat, not the short one, the long white coat, when you first became a medical doctor, what was your kind of reality check, welcome to medicine moment that made you think like, oh man, this is real?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, man, I unlike probably a lot of you all, don't even know what it feels like to have a short white coat. I did all my training at the University of Chicago here on Chicago South Side, where the white coat ceremony originated. So all of our med students, when I was a med student here, you get a white coat from day one, long one, like the same one that the attendings get. But I do know exactly what you're talking about. My welcome to medicine moment, I'll keep it in the trauma theme because for me, I wish it was something different, but it wasn't. I can remember I was an intern, first rotation out was trauma, hot summer of Chicago 2016. And I can remember one night, night two, we had about 4 or 5 walk-in GSWs in a night. We had
GSW, you got to break that down for the listeners, man.
Yeah, so for you all who don't know, as an emergency room physician who really focuses on trauma and gun and firearms prevention, meaning gun violence, a GSW is what we call a gunshot wound. So that means people who are coming in who are shot. Sometimes they're stabbed, you don't know, but some type of penetrating wound. But we usually say a GSW, especially if we know that was the mechanism. But on this night, hot summer, bloody summer, you're getting a bunch of people shot. So if you all can just picture it, you think of Chicago Med, you think of ER, you think of Grey's Anatomy, where people are just coming in, the bell keeps ringing to the point where you're not even finished dealing with one person when the next person's coming in. Some of those people don't make it. Some of them do. Some of them go up to the operating room. Some of them don't. And the reality of things is, as you think you're at your breaking point, and I'm this wide-eyed baby doc, right? I'm wet behind the ears, just trying not to mess up, just trying to get your notes in on time. As you can imagine, now three GSWs are coming in at once. So we're getting three code yellows, as we call them, meaning that a trauma activation is happening. And they're all level one, meaning that they're, penetrating, they're high risk. And the report we're getting is that they're all from one scene. So meaning that it's probably going to be chaos ensuing when it comes to the ER, not only medically, but also the context, safety wise, their families. And so as we're getting them, we get the first person we get in is a young man who we were told was shot in the leg, but that it was tourniqueted. By the time he gets to us, he's in cardiac arrest, meaning his heart is not beating anymore. He's lost so much blood from that one gunshot wound to the leg that his heart didn't have enough blood to keep pumping to the rest of his body. So of course, we're getting lines in them. And as an intern, your job is to run through the, primary survey of your airway, your breathing, your circulation. But chaos is ensuing because a part of this is known that blood is what he needs and that he's going to die. He's already dead, but all this is happening. So you go through all this, we crack his chest. I mean, we did an ER thoracotomy. So I'm in there like seeing a
So you
heart
literally busted his chest open.
in the chest open and try to get the heart going and to try to cross clamp the aorta, meaning that you're stopping blood loss to those legs that where he's bleeding from. So we cross clamp the aorta, we get his heart going, you fight for like 45 minutes, we get him living again, but unfortunately after the CT he's brain dead. And so the job of going and telling the family that he didn't make it, he started crashing, all of these things happen within like an hour, right? And so now I'm the intern. I've never told anyone that their loved one has died that wasn't like a sick ICU patient when I was in a fourth year medical
How
student.
old? How old is this patient roughly?
This guy is 19, man. He's 19, and so I walk into see my chief surgical resident on trauma. He's like, "Yo, Pratt, your job is to go in there, tell the family he's gone. We're getting more traumas coming in. Hurry up, make it quick. It's gonna be a busy night. You got notes to finish. We gotta sign it. All our lists need to be run. Hurry up." So now I'm walking in there to tell this news, and the family, of course, is expecting him to be alive, bro. Right? Like they're expecting he got shot in the leg. So now I'm walking into this family from the west side of Chicago, and I'm like, I'm Dr. Pratt, and the way we're taught, and hopefully all of you all who are in medicine will be taught this, that evidence-based is to tell them the news first, right? You let them know, not that, hey, you don't go through a story, you don't. So I'm thinking of my training, okay, muscle memory, tell them this stuff first. First words out my mouth. Unfortunately, he did not make it, right? He died. And so of course the room goes crazy, and his child's mother screaming and she's, "Y'all killed him. No way you can die from being shot in the leg," right? And so I'm head is hanging. Eventually I tell his mother what the details were. The baby's mother is taken out. She's hysterical, as you would imagine. And as I'm walking out with my head dejected, the mother says, "Hey, young man, Dr. Pratt, tell me, was there anything that my grandchild's mother could have done to help my son?" Because he was shot 3 or 4 blocks from the hospital, like literally walking distance, and we drove him. And of course, in my mind, I'm like, you know what? It is what nothing you could have done. And the mother says, "Don't lie to me." She says, "You don't lie to me. Look me in the face. Was there anything that could have been done?" And I said, "You know what? Potentially in a perfect world, maybe you hold pressure, you can do something, and maybe he does, I'm just pulling stuff out my hat." And she's like, "I want you to promise me that first and foremost, you don't hold your head because she knows it's July. She was a nurse. So she knows July means new doctor. So she
I was
knew
just
I
about to ask you that. So you were fresh out of
was
med school,
fresh.
baby.
She called it, right? So she's like, you're gonna have a long career. I can tell you've been through this. I can tell whatever happened in your past, you've lost people to violence. I want you to make sure you never let another mother unnecessarily go through this. That you prevent this as much as you can, and you never forget my son. Don't ever forget his name." And that day, I remember going home. Number one, I mastered the ED thoracotomy that night, so I went and studied that. Didn't get any sleep the next night off the trauma. I mastered how to deal with peripheral bleeding, and I discovered the Stop the Bleed initiative at that point. That same weekend, I read about what happened in Sandy Hook, Right after that, I think that same year, Parkland, Florida shooting happened. But I saw that money wasn't being spent proportionally and equitably in communities like my own that led the country in gun violence, yet in safer communities, people were doing it. And that set me on a journey that I'm on today, teaching emergency preparedness to youth. We've taught over 8,000 youth on Chicago South and West Side how to deal with gunshot wounds, how to do CPR. And ultimately, that's how we try to get a lot of black men to know that they can do something to stop their homies from getting killed, their brothers, their friends, their family, but more importantly, that they can build a career off that. And so that's where a lot of my programming comes from. It's motivating youth to save lives, not only today, but ultimately in the future as potentially black men in medicine.
I love it, man. I love it. I want to dive into the MedKeep program a little bit later on, but you know, you just said a whole lot of stuff that could be unpacked. I don't want to spend too much time on it because it could really be unpacked, man.
Sure.
But you know, coming in fresh doctor, seeing that at any point in time during that incident that was happening, did you stop to think yourself like, man, what have I got myself into? Like, what was the feeling you had? Was it like, man, I'm built for this, I'm about this, let's keep going, give me more, give me more? Was it like, man, this is too much? Or was it like, all right, I just got a long journey ahead of me? What was the feeling behind all that?
Man, that's a great question. I don't even think I've ever been asked that as many interviews as I've been on. The reality of things is that at that moment, you're thinking about just surviving the night, right? Like you're thinking there is no turning back. You know, this isn't war, but I would imagine it's how you feel if you're on the front lines where you know you can't go backwards at this point. You know that everything that you built your whole life on is going forward. And you kind of feel this pressure where you're a coward if you don't move forward. You're not, you train for this. If this person next to you is stepping up to the plate and they're doing their thing, then you're supposed to be able to. And so I think that it was like, hey, I need to learn what I need to learn so I can feel comfortable. Any barriers that were in front of me, I assumed were my fault, right? Like, so I assumed that, okay, I need to go be better because out of all the people standing in this room dealing with these traumas, I'm the only one that comes from here. I'm the only one that lives in these communities. Outside of my nurses or a tech or a janitor that's working there or security guard. And so I felt the disproportionate pressure of being the best, of making sure that I was being warm at the same time. Oftentimes those community members who are shot or afflicted, they reach out to you even when you're the lowest rank on the team. They'll say, hey, you can you help me, or I want to talk to you, more importantly.
Mm-hmm.
But what were those breaking points were where I wondered, okay, well, what's this system about, is when you realize how unequitable the system is, that no matter what we do around violence, if you're not doing it right, or that's medicine in general as well, other health inequities, if you're not doing it in the mechanism that means the worst of people get the most of help, then you actually are making the problem worse and you're seeing the gap grow. So when you're in these social moments where you realize with compassion fatigue, you're the only person here that has to take this stuff home. But at the same time, the other folks who are in charge of spending the money of the systems of this, they don't understand a day what it's like being in your life or the patient's lives. And when you see that and you say, whoa, this hill is way bigger to climb than we thought it was, those are those moments where you say, well, who's around me? Who's committed? Who's really down to do this work? And so getting through things like after a trauma shift, I think I've come to some of your conferences, like literally fresh off of a trauma shift.
Yeah, I remember that.
Or those type of works keep us going. Getting our residents out in the community to work through things are what keep us going. But every day, I think that I, as well as many of my colleagues here, challenge of what am I doing here? Am I making the impact that I'm supposed to?
Man, you're dropping a lot of gems, man. I mean, we could do it. We can do an entire breakdown episode of this pod. We can do a breakdown podcast episode of this podcast, man. You're dropping a lot of gems in here. So, and one of those gems, one of those things that you're highlighting here is you grew up in the South Side of Chicago. You opted to stay there, train there, and work there professionally. So let's rewind back. Let's talk about your childhood. From the outside looking at somebody, so I don't know much about Chicago. I come there for the summits and get to see you, year to year there. So I don't know much about Chicago, but from the outside looking in, we see Chirac, right?
Yes,
That's what they say on TV. You mentioned before it's not a war zone, but from the outside looking in, they paint Chicago as a war zone. First of all, so the question I'm going to ask you was what negative influences did that environment have on you? And let me preface that with saying that I'm also going to ask you what positive influences on the backside, because I don't want to be a guy who comes here and acts like it's all bad, because I know it's not all bad, right? But before I even talk about the negative influences, just describe to somebody who hasn't spent much time in South Side of Chicago, describe to us, what is that really like? living in that environment, growing up in that environment?
Absolutely. So when you grow up in Chicago or any severely underserved community, I like to do it the same way we would do a case in emergency medicine and Earl Wards. You say, what do I see, hear, smell when I walk in the room? So when you walk on the south side of Chicago, what you see, hear, and smell is very similar to what is portrayed. I would say I'm not one of these people who try to be the contrarian just for contrarian's sake, who try to run away from labels like Chirac. I'm about calling it what it is, and that was my reality. That even though I was very privileged in terms of knowledge, I grew up on a free lunch. I grew up getting the free financial aid. Many of my friends were those guys who grew up and became, drug dealers, gangbangers, potential athletes. So all the same things that you would see. I walked through Inglewood every day growing up. I walked through the south side of Chicago, and just to give you all geographically where I grew up. So I grew up right over east. So where Bibby and Herb and G Herbo and these guys are from, those are the same neighborhoods that I grew up in. I also grew up, which isn't too far from now, 63rd Street. So I know you all hear about, I'm from 64th, not from 63rd. Those are all blocks that were all part of the same neighborhood that I grew up, spent all my time as a youth athlete in the Jackson Park area, Woodlawn, and areas just surrounding University of Chicago. And for those of y'all who also don't know, University of Chicago is almost completely surrounded by the worst of worst communities in the country when you talk about healthcare disparities. And these are where many of the rappers, the entertainers, the Polo G's, the Lil Durks, the FBG Ducks, everybody that you all may hear about nationally from the youth perspective, these are those neighborhoods. And I oftentimes grew up knowing those guys or their big brothers or something like that. And now I get to the honor of taking care of them and their families because they're our patient population, especially with violence. But those are those negative influences. And I would say that just like for many youth, every sword has two edges to it. And so on one edge, there's this temptation of who are the cool, the popular dudes and women growing up when you're 12, 10, and seeing them in the nice cars with the rims on it and seeing what they do for a living. But the other side is that many of them see value. Like many of them have wisdom. They're not just some dumb, aloof gangbanger or drug dealer. If they're a leader, they usually have leadership skills. And what that means is that they'll see you and they'll say, you the smart one, big bro. Come on, little bro. You supposed to become a doctor. Who gonna take care of my auntie, bro, if you out here on the corner with four and them, right? So I need you to go do what you got to do unless you really about this life. So get up off the block, go
So
be an athlete. That was what it was like for me many
I
times.
love that. I love that. Let me pause now because that's a question I was going to ask you, right? Because I listen to a lot of podcasts and I hear these stories and a lot of guys who made it out of Chicago, whatever, from way back, Isaiah Thomas, old school Isaiah Thomas to
Yes, sir.
D Rose, all these guys, right? And when you hear these guys who grew up in Chicago talk, and not just Chicago, a lot of hoods or whatever, but Chicago specifically, a lot of these guys talk about being given a pass so they can go through neighborhood and they didn't get messed with. They were given a pass because whatever word got out that you're the athlete.
Yeah.
You just mentioned in a sense being given at least a local pass. I don't know if you got one from neighborhood to neighborhood, but you just in a sense mentioned being given a pass or whatever. But you tied it with you ended your statement by saying something about go be an athlete. I'm curious to know, do the smart kids get a pass? So let's say you're not an athlete, but the big homie on the block or whatever can look at you and tell that you're smart. Do those kids get a pass? Do they get it in their own area, like your own neighborhood, but do they also get it from hood to hood?
That's a great question. So I would say that when you're looking at whether the smart kids like athletes may get a pass, it depends. Just like for those athletes, it depends on your notoriety and your sense of value to the rest of your community. And this is why I tell many youth, especially young black men, always ask yourself, are you a net positive to the community? If you're a net positive, even if that means you're doing no negative, you're just doing a little positive, people take note of that and they will invest in that intrinsically. So if you're an athlete and what you're doing mostly is bringing a good name to your high school, your local area, people start associating you with going off and doing greater things, money, maybe even nefarious things, then they will give you a pass relatively, meaning that within what they actually control, which may not be a lot, they will say, you know what? Hey, let him do what he got to do because number one, we don't want the blowback coming. Number two, there's no win in this of extorting this person or doing wrong by them. There's no win. It's not smart. And number three, that's just not in the nature. I don't think many street dudes or people in our community actually are as nefarious by nature as people think that they are. Many times they feel like they're a product of their circumstance. And I would say that extends to smart kids too. I think that if you are naturally showing yourself to be positive, meaning maybe you tutor, maybe you're like, I was a tutor for athletes. I was an athlete. I was an all-state football player. But one thing, as a smart football player, I tutored all my guys. So I'm like, hey, whatever you need, this and that. What that did was their big brothers knew that. They knew, like, oh man, that's a professor, or that's Ron Isley, or that's Big Boy, that's the fridge, that's Refrigerator Perry. He tutors my little brother. He's gonna be walking through Inglewood, make sure he's good. And so the worst that you have is somebody grilling you, somebody in your face, and then you have to say, I'm here to meet this person, or I'm visiting this person. But what I would say is the counter to that is that the streets have changed a lot since I came through. The bloody summer of 2012, when I lost my older brother and a lot of friends, changed that reality where now, even if gangsters or street dudes want you to be safe, that doesn't carry the guarantee from neighborhood block to block. There may be some 15-year-old who doesn't care about that hierarchy 2 blocks away, who may not know who you are. They just see you, they're off a pill, they're doing whatever, they rob you, or a stray bullet hits you, or whatever altercation happens, you go to break it up, and now you're the one that's shot. That is the reality for things. And the last thing I will say is it's based on popularity. And I would say this is really important for you all out there, is that popularity, whether you're him or her with a capital H. If you're him with the capital H when you come up, then yes, it buys you favor. And I would say I was one of those, youth who was socially active. I was a leader of my peers growing up. I hung out. I did my fair share of nefarious things with the regular, average, everyday people.
Hey, explain the him thing, because you're gonna have a lot of viewers who don't understand, like, being the guy or whatever what that means. So explain that him thing in a little bit more detail.
Absolutely, absolutely. So when I say that if you were him or her with a capital H, what's that referring to is how socially interconnected you are as a youth. So what do you see, hear, smell with this? When I walk in a classroom and work with youth, they may be sixth graders. I can tell right off the bat who him is with a capital H. I know the young man who all the young men are listening to. I can tell who the popular cats are, even if it's not for like an obvious reason. It may not be because they're athlete, or that because they're super handsome, or they're a rapper or something. It may just be they actually get along with everybody, so people look to them for laughter, for leadership, etc. Those bonds don't change that much as you grow older, is what I'm saying. And the same way for athletes, they're him or her usually because of athletics. For a smart kid, in order to be him or her, deals with being balanced socially, to be able to say, I'm not just in the books. And if I am in the books, I'm using it to help the greater social context of my friends, especially those in need. So I was one of those guys. I hated seeing my guys struggle with things that was easy to me. So I'm like, nah, bro, I'll teach you this fractions, or, Matt, I want you in the field. I don't want you struggling. I hate watching people with their heads down. But that bought me favor, right? That bought me their ingratiation, regardless of what gang they were in, regardless of what block they were from. They were like, nah, bro, you helped me at a pivotal moment. And I run into those guys all the time as patients. I take care of the kids sometimes, and they will remember things I've completely forgotten that, they claim that I helped them or I did something for them. And that would be my lesson to you all, is that as you're younger, as you're coming up, don't fall into this counter. I'm over here, everybody else is over here, or I'm this, they are that, or those people are this. Because when you write your personal statements, when you go and vie for scholarships, and when you try to get these positions, you're going to be claiming to the system you represent them. You're going to be claiming that I'm the one that is here to represent equity and diversity and health inclusion from their perspective, because they're not represented. They're not a lot of doctors or nurses that are coming from those communities, which is why Black men in medicine exist, which is why these programs exist. Remember that as you come forward, so that you're not the fake person, that you're not the inauthentic person, then complaining why the system is coming down on you and your people don't support you. But it may be because you didn't support them coming up.
I love that, man. Absolutely love that. So, kind of take home message for that little segment right there. Essentially, what I believe, not just the kids, but everybody needs to hear is you need to find a way to add value back to your community, right? And if you're adding that value back to your community, they'll recognize it to a point where you may or may not get a pass, but you might get a pass. But the thing is, it's not just getting a pass, on the streets or whatever. It's getting the same thing happens in the professional world, right? Same thing happens in Fortune 500 companies, whatever. You get passes just depending on how much value people see you contributing. You mentioned, if you're okay talking about this, you mentioned your brother.
Yes, sir.
If you don't mind, go into detail. What happened to your brother, and how did that impact you, influence you?
Yeah, yeah. I'll start clean for you all because as a black man, this is something that many of you all statistically are going to face, which is survival. And growing up on Chicago South Side, one thing I didn't talk about in depth is that my salvation was my older brother. It was me and my older brother. He was 5 years older than me. His name was Rashad. And so he fought a lot of battles, so I didn't have to fight those battles. He built a name and respect in the community that meant I didn't have to. So many times, he played football before me, but didn't go to a high school that was a big powerhouse school. So he never developed into some great known football player, but he was a dog, right? He, was smart, was very technically gifted, but that wasn't how he chose to pursue his career. He went based on what was safe for him. Where did my friends go? What schools do they go so that I can make sure I'm not vulnerable in the school that I go to? But he was able to teach me the learning lessons from all of that and provide this cloak of protection that no matter what gangsta I ran into, if they were in my neighborhood, they would be like, "Oh, you Rashad's little brother, man. Oh man, your brother, this and that, man. I love that dude. Get up out of here. It's dangerous over here tonight. It's dark out here, bro. Get home. And if you're not doing what you're supposed to do, I'm gonna tell your brother or I'm gonna tell your pops." So when I got to med school, in the summer of 2011, my brother was a big resource for me on how to just be a man, bro. Like, are you getting a car for the first time? You trying to throw some sounds in your car? You trying to get a computer? You want to know what's the best thing? You want to know who's got the deal? A big brother or uncle or mentor is the person that's going to help you navigate how to spend, how to set up an account in a different way than maybe the women in your life will, right? And I think we all individually know what that means to us. But as I finished my first year of medical school going into summer of 2012, my brother was murdered due to gun violence, just driving home on his way home. We believe while stopping someone who was going in and out of cars. There have been a lot of burglaries, carjackings, as they are now. This was the beginning of that. This was like the new wave of people just breaking into cars and stuff at night, when in Chicago, you hadn't seen that be a thing. But nevertheless, that hit me in deep ways, and it set me on a journey that I'm on today. And being able to cope with that loss and figure out where it placed in my career was important. But it dealt with the last conversation we had with him, and I'll leave it here for you all. The last conversation I had with my brother, and this is one of those black men things that, you have to kind of be there to understand. But if you can imagine a little brother getting to med school, getting all these awards, I'm the president of SNMA, I'm doing a lot of regional work, I'm getting a lot of awards, as coming off of my first year at University of Chicago in my home neighborhood, right? So meaning that I'm closer to my home at the university in med school than I was in high school, right? So you can imagine your guys that want to hang with you. Everybody wants to be there. Other people who want to be doctors, who are in your age, they want to be there. They want to be around you. And so, you can imagine you're inflated a little bit, right? Like you're like riding this high. You want to get on with your career. You want to make money. I wanted to get an MBA. And my brother came to me as I was living at a high rise right off the lakefront near University of Chicago. And he was like, "Man, bro, this is dope. We watching college football, first game of the season or something like that." And he was like, "Man, this is dope. But remember this, man." He's like, "All this doesn't mean ish if you're not able to fight for those who come from the block like you. If you can't put on for them, you a sellout just like the people you came up complaining about your whole life. Even though even though everybody's gonna like you, everybody's gonna be in your face and supporting you, that's the risk that you run." And he told me that in life, and he put this in street terms, right? But he was like, in life, there are some people who kill themselves all day, all night, and they die on a legacy where they built a great legacy, but maybe their families don't have what they need all the way. Then you have other people who build a great, future for their families of wealth and of resources, but maybe their legacy isn't what they wanted. And he said both are difficult, but bro, if you as smart as these people say you are, and you come from where we know you come from, maybe you one of the people that's smart enough to do both. Maybe you can figure out how to help your people in your family and in your community and build a legacy, but it's difficult. And literally that was the last conversation we had a few days before he passed. And so that's what I kind of rest on. And I always ask myself those questions daily. Am I doing something that's helping both my family who's local to me so that I can keep doing it? And then also, am I doing something that helps my greater community and keep that balance?
You haven't written a book yet, have you?
Not yet. Not yet.
Man, I coach. I got a coaching program where I teach doctors how to write books. I don't know if you know that or not, but I've written a lot of books. I teach doctors how to write books, stuff like that. But I'm hearing your story, dude. You gotta
Yes,
get a
sir.
book, man. You got absolutely have to.
Coming from you, that's not light. That's no light work. If Dale says that, you all, one mentoring lesson as we talk about mentoring, when your brother, whether that's a peer or a big brother or even a little brother, tells you something and they got an expertise in it, make note of it, follow through on it, and hear them out. So that's assignment number one leaving here.
I'm serious, man. Let's connect and all that stuff, and
Yes,
you know,
sir.
we got a whole program, got a writing coaches and all that type of jazz, right? Because I mean, you hear a lot of stories in medicine. Everybody's got stories, and people love stories, stuff like that. But you know, yours just hits different. You know, yours completely hits different, right?
Yes,
I
sir.
knew some of this stuff already. I didn't know it in as much detail, but of course, I already knew this because we've been knowing each other since we did the
Yep.
documentary and stuff. But yours definitely hits different. So let's kind of dive into the decision for medicine. How old were you when you said, "Okay, I want to be a doctor," and what was that thing that made you say you want to be a doctor? I mean, you've got plenty of stuff you've told me already that could have been the thing that made you say you want to be a doctor. But do you remember what the specific thing was that kind of triggered it for you?
Yeah, man, I fit statistics in many different ways. So when someone asked the question of what was my first moment in medicine, I fit in that category of people first and foremost who were like kindergartners with the Fisher Price, doctor's bag. And I can remember being as early as that saying that. Now my children have the same doctor's bag, and I literally remember those exact same things. But the reason why was because I had a black man in medicine in my own home. My father, Edwin Pratt, was a black psychiatrist who focused on black adolescent youth mental health and behavioral health problems. And though he had lost his practice, but I'm the youngest. So I'm the youngest child. So by the time that I came along, psychiatric care, for those of you all who are interested in mental health, especially black men's mental health, do your history on Carl Bell and those people here in Chicago who were the first pioneers on the mental and behavioral well-being of adolescent black young men and its relationship to violence and violent tendencies. Now that's NIH funded work, which is what I do today. But I grew up literally with those type of people in my circle. Carl Bell's office was on the corner of my block. And now I get to read his research and build on it. But that type of thing, every pediatrician or doctor I had was black, right? My dad's med school friends were my physicians. So I never
Wow.
had this thought of I can't do it until I got into school. It was actually in school that made me waver, right? It were the teachers who were black many times, who would be, the Miss Johnsons, the Miss this. They'd say, if you've got the attitude you've got, you won't ever be a doctor. And my attitude,
You're talking about like elementary school type of thing, junior high,
yeah,
not
elementary
mentally.
school, high school, on and on, I would be challenged and I would doubt myself and I would build this imposter syndrome, learning about how bad our communities were, how tough higher education was, seeing your friends die and suffer
Oh,
and
let me pause real fast because I just know
yeah.
you said you had some teachers say things like if you've got
Mhm.
this type of attitude, like you'll
Yep.
never be a doctor type of thing. In those situations, do you think that what was happening was the teachers were doubting you and trying to deflate you type of thing, or do you think it was a teacher trying to provide some sort of correction, hoping you'd make it in the manner that they knew how to provide that correction? That's a difficult thing.
Absolutely, man. I would assume that when a professor or teacher in high school or elementary school is saying that, taking emotion out of it, I would assume there's a mixture of both, right? That your teachers are human, so there's this kind of tit for tat component with a child if you work with youth. So you work with a ton of youth, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's
Yeah.
always a contention unless you're very secure in yourself to just say, "Nah, young man, you're right," but how are we gonna get there? So for many of those teachers, they had gotten to a place where my wit level, right? You're talking about a smart young man who's able to go tit for tat with you. That can be exhausting and that can be distracting for the class. And so what I would imagine is that part of it was because I was being an a-hole, right? Where they're like, well, you'll never be this without that. The other part was probably trying to encourage me. I remember the differences. Some were that where they were like, hey, hey, young man, I see so much in you that I'm going to stay on you. I'm going to be the person that's on you to make sure you get there because if I don't, you don't realize the odds of you doing what you're saying you're doing are exceedingly difficult. You may not know that, but a lot of pitfalls can happen. But there were also people who in their ignorance, 100% in their ignorance, didn't know doctors, didn't know a friend that went to med school, and they literally were speaking on things that they had no business speaking on. Like I
Yeah.
remember one lady was like, your hands are too big. Your hands are too big to be a surgeon or to be an orthopedic surgeon. And then you meet dudes that's like 6'8", and then, so sometimes people are saying silly stuff, but the silliest of it was the mindset. And that's what I was getting to. I would learn that mindset was something that was actually conducive of being a physician. Always being questioning, always never settling for
Mm,
learning something one way, always wanting to help your peers and having low patience with seeing your peers struggle with something and the teacher not being able to help them and you wanting to give some advice or wanting to help. These were things that it took, unfortunately, white teachers in high school, you know, those Teach for America teachers, right? At the same time, my black teachers, and then, listen, I'm extremely pro-black, whatever you think, and
I'll
they
take
would,
the,
yeah, yeah,
I'll take the unfortunately out. I'll say
yeah, yeah.
fortunately, right?
Fortunately,
Yeah,
those young Teach for America teachers, they had peers. You got to think, now we're older. They are 23, 22, 24 who are teaching in the hoods of Chicago. And these are from like farm communities. These are rural,
yeah.
young white people. And so they were able to see me from a different lens and juxtapose me to everyone else. And so literally the same days that I would be getting into it with my biology teachers who were from my community, it was those outside of the community that would say, no, no, D, you were exactly like my friend that's in med school. You remind me of him so much. You remind me of her so much. Y'all are like similar people. You just have to get over this stuff. And I'll tell you what, I'll make you a deal. If you keep helping with the students who I struggle with, who don't listen to me, I will take homework off of your burden because you're doing well in the homework. You don't need to do busy work. I'll help you. And basically, that was the model that helped me get through college because that's what being a TA and a tutor, and it's like you're buying favor through helping others, and it teaches you to be a teacher. And I wouldn't be a professor this day had it not been for people saying, I'll give you a barter, and if you help people and you help you use that class clown, that social network, that being able to reach people, use that to help us instead of to disrupt, and I will help you get to where you're trying to get to.
I love it, man. Seeing the gift, and I talk about this sometimes, right? Seeing the gift that somebody has and
Yeah,
leveraging that gift, but then more importantly, teaching them how to leverage that gift for the benefit rather than just criticizing it and getting on somebody. Um,
absolutely.
so sports, huge thing, obviously for everybody, but of course specifically for young black men, and definitely young black men in areas such as where you grew up. You were a star football player. Tell us a little bit about that, your football days, and tell us about that balance between, like, did you want to be a pro football player more than a doctor? Did you want to do both? You say, when I'm done with the NFL, I'm going to the MD. Like, what was the way you viewed this as a youth, and how did you balance that? You may remember in the Black Men and White Coats documentary we did, Shane Battier is on there, and Shane's talking about his whole focus was just being the best he could be at both. So he weighed them equally, right, between basketball and academics. So what was your approach throughout all this?
I think that practically when you're a youth, you think that being a doctor is a decision that's way, way off, right? You don't always connect what's happening right then to closing a door on yourself. Like if you mess up in high school or you don't do well in calculus, that it's going to hurt you. So I think that proximally to me, sports was right in your face, right? Like everything you do every day on the field could potentially make or break your life. But I remember a key point, I would say to Shane's point, to Mr. Battier's point, for me, it was probably 50-50 in both because I saw them one and the same. I can remember getting the conversation from my parents that like, hey, unlike your older sisters we're paying through college and we paid through college, our family's not like that no more. If you're going to go to college, you said you want to be a doctor or study medicine, you're going to have to go get a scholarship. So you need to be going hard on this football field. You need to be going hard in the classroom because if it's not you, then it ain't going to happen. And so I remember that was like my freshman year of high school. So I was a freshman on varsity. So I remember thinking, okay, well, everything I do is mutually linked, where if I want to get to college, being the best athlete that I can be is actually the way to get and become a great pre-med star. And for me, I also had a peer example that was a level above me, right? So same age, a year above me, but was a level in terms of magnitude above me. And for me, that was Myron Rolle. So many of you all may know who Myron is, right?
Yeah.
Neurosurgery, candidate about to be finished and, doing his thing, the 2% way and writing books and doing great things. But Myron, at the time I was in high school, he was on the cover of ESPN's magazine as the number one high school football player in the country. So I remember reading his story that he wanted to be a doctor then. And this is as I'm at the same stage, but understand he's at magnitudes higher, his family
So
and
he
where
was
they,
so wow. So I didn't
yeah,
realize he was like that in high school.
yeah, Myron
I
was
mean,
him. right? So I had players on my team that were number one in the nation, right? I grew up on a number one team in the state. You know, we were the football version of Derrick Rose and him's basketball team. So for those of y'all who
What
don't know,
school? What school? What school did you go to?
I went to Morgan Park, which is on the same street as Simeon, which is where D Rose went.
Simeon,
So
yeah.
where Derek went, this on the same street of Vincennes, just a couple miles down the road.
Yeah.
So we were rivals, like friendly, brotherly rivals. So his teammates and us, we were all very close. We came up together from elementary school. So for me, I'm motivated by athletes, but at the same time, I knew I wasn't them. So I knew I wasn't D Rose. We called him Pooh back in the day. Every party I went to, I would ask his teammates, like, yo, where's Pooh? Like, Pooh here today. He like, bro, you know, Derek, you know, he had the key in the court. He had the pro-am. This Saturday nights at 9 p.m., man, when you kicking it after a game or something, you hearing that this dude that you've known since 7th, 8th grade is literally balling at all times. You realize there's a different level. The same way I'd be in medical programs in high school when nobody else would be in them, when my other teammates wouldn't be in them. There was this passion I had for that. So I knew coming out of high school, I wasn't going to be tall enough. I'm only 5'11". So many high school, college recruits were saying, hey, if you're not 6'3" or better, it's hard for us to make you a starter on the Big Ten level. Maybe you go mid-level. So for me, it was the writing was starting to be on the wall, even though I was doing really well, that the odds are I need to put my money in the physician book. But I wanted to stay around sports. And that's where I'm at today, where as an ER physician, one whole wing of everything I do is around sports. And hopefully we get to it. But now we got a new program that's literally built on the people like Myron Rolle and myself and others, people like Greg Primus, who were former pro athletes who went into medicine and became physicians. And we call that program Sneakers to Scrubs. And that's just another way to increase black men in medicine, because all these studies are starting to come out, whether it's orthopedics and double AMC and others, that are showing that surgical candidates, med students, are better prepared if they have a high level of playing sports in their background, not just because they want to go do sports, but because the skills, the staying early, the coming early, staying late, the team leadership, taking constructive criticism, the resiliency that you get through sports actually build good skills as a physician.
All right, so yeah, I want to get to those things here in a second. So let's
Yeah.
let's kind of skip directly into this college phase now. Then, so in college, you did play football,
Good,
right?
yeah.
So what was that balance like to be a collegiate athlete, um, knowing your pre-med already because you went in as a pre-med? What was your major?
So I went to Valparaiso University, Valpos in Northwest Indiana, just by Chicago, right outside of
Do
Gary.
you know Bryce? Do you know the name Bryce Drew?
Bryce, yeah,
They,
Bryce.
they,
Bryce was just taking over as coach. I want to say when I was there, so he was under his dad. His dad was still coach, and then I want to say he was an assistant at the time. So yeah, so and
I just know because I grew up.
his dad is the legendary Homer Drew, so legendary college basketball coach at Valpo. I think he's gone in the Hall of Fame at this point.
I just know because I grew up in Houston. I just remember Bryce Drew got drafted to the Rockets when I was out in was it in '96, sometime in the '90s. He got drafted to the Rockets, and I remember, those younger than me, you may not remember, he had a big time shot in the whatever NCAA March Madness, big time shot. He became huge, and that's how, as far as I remember, that's how Valparaiso became like a big time name in basketball, at least.
Man,
Is Bryce Drew's
give
shot.
y'all boy Dale some credit on his college basketball knowledge, man. Like that
Yeah,
is
man.
crazy, bro. Like he going back with the college basketball Sweet 16 hoops knowledge.
Yeah, Bryce Drew. So you're there, Valparaiso, playing football,
Yep.
trying to do this thing. So what's that like? Trying to balance this thing out.
So it's tough, man. I think those were some of my toughest years, where you don't have this clout when you go to a mid-major school or a school that's not University of Illinois or Penn State or Northwestern like some of my peers did. The reality of things is that like you're there as a passion athlete. So everything you give, nobody's like patting you on the back for that, right? Like nobody's patting you on the back. So I
Hmm.
was a full max credit hour student. So I was pulling 17 credit hours. I was a bio major with a chem minor, with a soc minor, and a psych minor. So 3 minors, triple minor, major, only because it made sense to do so. And you all now who take the MCAT know why. So this was before the MCAT changed and had psychology, sociology, and these humanities on it. And I had professors who saw something in me and said, you know what, future Dr. Pratt, you should be a psych and soc minor because that's going to make you a better physician and you're good at this stuff. You like being in these classes. They're good balance for you. So, you balance your labs with always a psych or a soc. And it gave me a different pool of students. So I think that maxing out on credit hours while being a football player got tough, and I battling through injuries, having to be up at 6 a.m. every morning, and then you're in lab to, practice, then late night labs to 8 or 9 p.m. It was rigorous. I was struggling from sleep apnea at the time as well. So you're literally not getting any sleep. You're pulling a bunch of all-nighters. Your study skills aren't that great. So my study skills were not that great coming out of high school at all. So I was relying on a lot of just pure intellect and my social abilities to like run tutoring session, like a study session, not even tutoring sessions, where I would benefit from everybody else's hard work. Like they would be telling me with this
Hey,
chapter, I was like piecing it together. And that all came to a head when I was a junior and I was forced to quit football. I was forced to make a decision because I was starting to get punished for just being a better student. So if I stayed in lab a little longer, my football team wasn't doing well, right? I think we had only won maybe 1 or 2 games the year before that. And that was new for me. I'd always been on winning teams. I didn't even know how to be on a losing team. The attitude of losing just wasn't mine. I don't do good in that. I'll become the problem guy. So in a locker room that's losing, I'm the problem guy. In the locker room that's winning, I'm one of the leaders. I'm one of the galvanizers in that force. So for me,
problem guy meaning you're the one who's getting on your teammates and trying to get them going and pointing
yeah,
out what people need to do better.
yeah, you voicing your displeasure, like so you're holding people accountable. You're trying to say, hey, bro, like we'll never win going into a game if you're taking bets before the game on how much we get beat
Oh,
by.
let's while we're on that,
Yeah,
let's reflect that with medicine right now while we're on this topic. So tell me,
sure.
how does that tie in with how do you move that football thing of being quote unquote the problem guy to medicine when you're in a code yellow or whatever code and things don't go well? Is there a reflection that did you mature in a certain way? So how do you deal with things now? Because you're still a leader of a team, right? How do you deal with things now when they don't go well?
I think that to some degrees, to my good and bad, I'm very similar to how I was then. So I'm very much the kind of person while I'm always calling out systemic inefficiencies while I'm in the system. The difference is between being just disgruntled and being someone who is on the forefront of being a leader to change a culture is your actions. So I think when I was in college, I didn't know what actions to do to actually make those words matter. Meaning that, like, if I want to galvanize a team, the best thing to do is to be in the gym as early as you can. The best thing to do is be first in all the drills. The best thing to do is to lead from the front, so that when you're saying, "Hey guys, come on," you're pulling them, not pushing people. Mentorship is bad when you're pushing people because they may feel like they're on the ledge and you can't always see the ledge from behind, right? But when you're pulling, you're saying, I'm safe where I'm at. I've done this a little bit. I'm a little bit out on the ledge. I know it's solid. Come with me. And I think that nowadays, that's what I'm much more in the habit of doing, which is I'm not going to ask you to spend more time in the simulation lab if I'm not there. So I'm literally like, yo, I'm going to spend extra time in the sim lab working on airway skills, working on how to put a central line in, working on my medical critical skills. Come with me. Just come kick it. You want to come be there and I'll show you it's not scary. I'll show you that you're going to get better this fast. One session, you're already getting better. And I'll also show that in the heightens of moments, I'm not panicking. So I may be laughy, jokey normally. In very dire situations, I try to maintain a semblance of that because I know that how I'm behaving is being observed by the people who are looking to follow you. And I think that in college, I didn't always realize that I kind of just was in survival mode many of the times. But I would imagine that in 5 or 10 years, I'll be looking back now and saying the same thing. I'll be looking back now and saying, man, I had to take things up a level in terms of how I was moving. I had to listen to Dale a little bit more. I had to, capitalize on connections and take people's advice a little bit more because my youth were looking at me, who are residents, who are med students now as they progressed.
That's what it's about. Growth. Always growing, always growing. Um, so you briefly mentioned MCAT.
Yeah.
Tell me, how was your MCAT experience? So, for the listeners who don't know, MCAT is medical college admission test. The test is not necessarily required. Some programs have MCAT waivers, but for most people, a test is required to get into medical school. A lot of people struggle with it. I did not do great on my MCAT back. I think I got like a 25 or something. That's the old test scores. Now the scoring is completely different, of course, but to put it in, I don't know what it would translate to, but I got roughly the average score of all test takers, not even matriculants, of all test takers. But fortunately, in my situation, I had straight A's throughout college, so that, and a lot of other stuff, so that kind of carried me. What was your MCAT experience like?
I think I tried to do things cookie cutter with it. This was during the learning who I was phase. So at this time, I was a balance between being an imposter syndrome person versus being someone who's this brash athlete. So you don't know how you're going to do in the MCAT. And I remember starting out as a freshman and thinking, oh, okay, as long as I just learn this stuff, I'll do well on the MCAT. But I would ask the upperclassmen, and there was so much pressure. And remember, I'm one of the few African American people on campus, so I'm asking like this, who I'm being told are the smartest people on campus, and they're like, "Yo, the MCAT's crazy, bro. Like, you got to be studying now." So it put a lot of fear and imposter syndrome in me. So I'm always was preparing. So I went into the MCAT the first time with the goal of at that time getting just I think like a 28. I think was my goal, which compares to you all scores nowadays. I think that's about like a 511, 50, 509. You all can fact check on the grid, the conversion grid. But I got I think a 27 the first time I took it, which was a point below, but I remember it was above the cutoff for competitiveness. So I remember people saying like, "Hey, it'll allow you to be competitive," and I did really good in one of the areas. I think like biological sciences and the reading, like whatever the reading was. So to that, all I had to do well was in physical. So it was like, okay, if you just improve your physical, you can take your best and you can do well. But I didn't prepare very well. I was enrolled in a Kaplan course. I used some like a scholarship I had gotten from playing sports. I was student athlete of the year, the NFL Players Association student athlete of the year in high school. So I was able to use some scholarship money to get into a prep course, but I didn't take advantage of it. It was at night as like you're still a college student. So I'm like just going, just listening. I wasn't doing the workbooks, wasn't doing the practice questions. And so after that period, I learned that the real mastery of standardized tests was questions, questions, questions. And so as I started doing the practice questions, the workbooks over the summer after my junior year, while I was in like some pipeline programs, pathway programs at U Chicago, I was able to drastically improve my score. I got a 31, I believe, which is probably somewhere like around a 516, 517, something like that. And then I was able to get into my number one choice, which was University of Chicago, off the wait list. So I barely got in, as opposed to the other schools I had gotten into off the 27. So I was able I was able to retake it, take it up a notch. And every time I've taken tests, I would say I've probably gotten a little bit better at standardized tests because I know more that they're questions, questions, questions are the method, but no one had ever told me that prior to that point. And that's what led to a lot of my peers failing. They did so bad on the MCAT the first time, they didn't even try to retake it the second time.
Yeah, that's huge. So yeah, listeners, students specifically, y'all pay attention. It's all about questions. So that's interesting. That's good. I like your story because I was similar, right? I got a 25 the first time, and the rest of my application was pretty strong. So I was kind of like, and I interviewed at some schools, got waitlisted and things. I remember interviewing at I went to University of Missouri for undergrad and med school ultimately, but I interviewed at a lot of places, including Harvard. I remember interviewing at Harvard, and they're like, "Man, your application's so great. Just retake the MCAT."
Yep.
And I left there thinking like, "No, I'm good. Like I don't want to retake it." I took a chance on that 25 and just went with what I obviously did not get in Harvard. Took a chance on that 25 and went with, I got into some schools, right? But I stayed at the school that I went to for undergrad. And you did yours the other way around. You had a school that you really, I guess it makes sense, right? Because maybe if I really, really wanted to go to like a Harvard or something, then I would have retaken it. But in your case, you knew the school that you wanted to go to, your home environment, so that makes sense. So
Yeah.
you did what you had to do to retake it, to go and make it happen.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that's good
I
because
wouldn't have taken it. Yeah. No, you're right. You're right there. I would not have retaken it had not the gatekeepership to me being able to practice equitable medicine not been one of the top institutions. I think at that time we were like top 10. We were like number 4 or 5 before the
yeah, you
rankings.
guys. Oh
It
yeah,
was we were pretty high up there, so they were very high up, and this was before holistic evaluations came through. So
yeah.
this was like when you were just cutoffs. It was just like if you don't meet this cutoff and your test scores and GPA and reason,
I,
you out.
I'm not sure holistic evaluations have come through yet. Still,
Right. Facts. Touche. Touche.
but you're right. Before the whatever the all the noise about it came through. But no, I'm thinking like you did. It's a hard thing. So that the message there is it's got to be case by case if you
Yep.
retake it or not.
Yep.
Um, when in doubt, probably the safe thing to do would be to retake it, honestly,
Yeah.
right? It's just a little bit of work. And while we're on that topic, I forgot, let me make sure I mentioned. So to the pre-meds listener, go to blackmenandwhitecoats.org/MCAT. We still got some money to pay for some MCAT. So, our nonprofit, we got some money in the bank. So we're paying for people's MCATs who need MCATs, right?
Wow.
So blackmenandwhitecoats.org/MCAT, little form out there, fill it out. And then, you may have the opportunity for us to pay for you guys MCAT through our nonprofit.
Wow.
So let's just a couple more things. And, I know I don't want to keep you. I know you're a doctor and all that stuff.
You
I
got me,
know.
bro. I clicked
Yeah.
the schedule for you because you doing God's work, bro.
No, appreciate it. So get into Pritzker, right? That's what it's called, right? Pritzker, get into University of Chicago School of Medicine, Pritzker. You mentioned imposter syndrome before. So when sometimes we get in med school, like in my class, not very many black people. When my starting class, we started with 2 black men in my class. We finished with a little bit more, with 4, but we started with 2 black men in my class. How many black men were in your class? How many black women were in your class as well? And was there that imposter syndrome? Was there pressure on you, right? Like, just what was it like? Again, back to the feeling. What was the feeling like of being a black man in a white coat at University of Chicago in Pritzker?
Man, it was daunting. I think that, aside from everything that was my personal connection with the area, right? We'll talk about that a little bit. But, for me, it was scary because I'm probably the worst student in the class, right? Like, just to be objectively honest, this isn't the imposter syndrome talking. I'm probably, just odds are, you're the last one off the wait list. And I knew I was the last one off the wait list because I actually got swapped from my homie who was like their top student. So U Chicago wanted her very, very bad. And we had done pathway programs together. And she had the highest MCAT score a black woman has ever gotten. Right. So she had like a perfect 44 or something like that, 99th percentile. And she was an athlete as well. Her name's Arjun McCaverns. But Arjun is an OB-GYN doc now. And so we bonded on being being college athletes, both being from Chicago, but she was just way better student. And I remember learning so much from her in the summer as peers together. But she called me one day and she was like, yo, I'm gonna go to Northwestern. I think they got a new women's hospital. I'm out of here. I think, and she had done all these U Chicago programs. So she was the favorite. So then I remember literally the same day getting a call off the wait list in July, like late June, early July, going into med school. I had already enrolled in another med school, was already getting ready for orientation. So you can imagine 3 weeks past that point, you start an orientation, right? So now orientation happens. So I feel like imposter syndrome, but real imposter syndrome. I knew I had an uphill battle. There were 5 African Americans in my class. 6 to start off with, only 1 other black man who was also undergrad from university.
How big is your class total?
You're talking about 88, so 5 out of 88. So you're talking about 6. 1 quit week 1, right? Literally, she probably was the strongest student coming in. And this is learning lesson number 1, that when we sat down on paper and we said who comes from where, who comes from this, where were you at? She on paper sounded like the strongest of us, right? Had come from the biggest name undergrad institution, had all these scholarships, research, etc. And she quit like week 1, and the pressure, we tried to keep her to stay. That was crazy for me. Like,
Did she quit medicine in general? Or just quit that school?
Everything done. Just was like, this is too much. Like the day of the test was just like, first test of med school, it's usually like a week in anatomy, you're doing histo, so you warming up. This is not even a tough test. Like, we knew this was the baby test before you start getting the real test. And she was just like, I can't do this. This is too much pressure, too much this. And, we were in tears. We tried to keep her, quit. So we were down from 6 to 5 right off the bat, right? So we went from probably being 6% of the class, 7% of the class, down to like 4, 5, 6%.
First week, man.
And remind you, 90% of the patient population that we serve is black at this hospital, right? So 90%, and you're only 4 or 5%. So for us, it was tough. One thing that helped me was becoming chapter president of SNMA. The biggest thing that helped me was being able to have the home field advantage. So I would say the home field advantage, don't overstate it. It's not because you're just going to have parties at your crib. Is that you can tap in. That people who are bigger than you and more prominent than you can look back and say, he or she has future value. So I'm going to actually help them. I'm going to give them encouragement. I'm going to connect with them because they are useful to me. And for me, that person, one of them was Dr. Brian Smith. He's the director of our cardiac cath lab now here at U Chicago. He's also a current White House fellow. So look up Brian. He's a GOAT. He runs program med school at Pritzker at that time. He's a fourth year, literally just had graduated when I was doing my summer pathway program internship and research called SOMER, Pritzker School of Medicine Experience and Research. Go sign up for it next year if you all haven't. We need more black men in those programs. But I was able to see him as the gold standard. People tell me, Brian doesn't like when I say it this way, but he's a black man in white coats, a big white coat, right? He holds real juice. He's a him with a capital H. But Brian, at the time was put to me in the way by the School of Medicine. Like, if you want to get into med school here, you need to do this to get into med school. And if you lucky enough to ever get into med school here, then the gold standard is that guy. And if you're half the student that he is, you'll be a success your whole life. And I carried that. So every time I would talk to Brian, I would be like, yo, big bro, how's residency, your intern, and how's that going, and this and that. And the one thing he handed off to me was working at Project Brotherhood, you all. So my first experience in community on 63rd Street at a clinic run by Dr. Eric Whitaker at the time, an initiative called Project Brotherhood. Dr. Whitaker was also in the Black Men, White Coats documentary and movie. But he, at the time, as I was an undergrad student, had an organization called Project Brotherhood in my community where med students who were first years taught black men health curriculum, whether it was on prostate exams, HIV, and you'd have these conversations where black men were getting barbershop haircuts. So before people like Italo Brown and us came up who were doing these things in barbershops, Dr. Whitaker and them were teaching us how to go do that stuff, but in a clinical setting. So he was bringing those things to the clinic of mental health, haircuts, food, and real men talks. And you as the youngest man in the room, as much as we taught them, they were teaching us. And from then, me and Brian have gone on our careers. We're both faculty now here at UChicago. He's still like a big brother to me. But that's one of those connections where he didn't start off taking me to lunch or dinner or limo or taking me on a cruise like some of my friends who their mentors would. Brian was like, yo, bro, I heard you want to do some outreach. You're going to take over this role I used to do when I was a first year med student, but you're going to start it before you even a med student here. So to be clear for you all, before I was even a med student at this institution, I was working with med students at the institution in my own community. And then guess who wrote in on my application when I was on that wait list? The whole first year med student class, half of them, from what I understand, I was told, all wrote in on my application and said, take him off the wait list. He needs to be here at our med school. He worked with us in the community. He's going to be a future leader one day. And I think that played a big part. Those of you all, that's the lesson. Take care of the home field advantage. Take care of your people, and those med students and schools around you, they need you even before you're a medical student, and that's how you get your value.
Exactly. And that ties into the very first thing we started this off with about, adding value to the community. Community's going to look out for you, right? They gave you a big pass, right? They gave you a big pass right there. So let's bring this home. Tell me about your program. Tell me about MedKeep. Tell me, we kind of talked about where it got started and, that night in the trauma and you did the Stop the Bleed initiative. But tell me, what exactly is the program? What do you do? How does it operate? If people want to learn about it, how do they learn about it, et cetera?
Absolutely. So MedKeep is the Medical Careers Exposure and Emergency Preparedness Initiative. It's a 501c3 that we were forced to start because we found out that when you're in an academic institution, you're not eligible to receive any of the funds that institution gives out unless you're, number one, a community-based organization that's a non-for-profit. Number two, you are led by a faculty member and who's getting awards either as an intern. Those are the only ways that you will ever receive money at an academic institution, even if they're giving out all this money for community organizations. So that's what MedKeep is. We started it to address the biggest problems facing our communities in an equitable manner. So the number one cause of death on the south side of Chicago and many other communities is gun violence for our youth. So we teach every youth how to deal with gunshot wounds. The second leading cause of death is out of hospital cardiac arrest. So we teach CPR, but we use that as a entry point into medical career exposure to empower these same youth in O Block or Argdale Gardens or, STL or Over East, all of these areas that you all may associate with Chicago. We go right in the hearts of those communities and we say, you all are the most hit by these emergencies. We're going to teach you all how to survive and then show you all that you can be an EMT, nurse, doctor, phlebotomist. And then we guide them into those programs. along that pathway, were so traumatized who we were dealing with, they couldn't even make it through these training sessions. So they'd be saying, yo, my brother was killed last week, Dr. Pratt, while we're trying to teach him about how to put on a tourniquet. Then the next one would say, I found out that my dad or uncle died on social media when my friends were sharing a link of him taking his last breaths on Facebook Live, and they were under the comments laughing and joking and, basically dissing the dead before he was even dead. That's how this young lady found out her uncle was dead. So had learned we had to address their traumas too, because had actually already been through these injuries. So that forced us to create Trap Violence, which is the Trauma Recovery and Prevention of Violence initiative that works in these same neighborhoods in schools to teach youth how to conflict resolve, how to cope with traumas in themselves and a peer, and how to recognize mental and behavioral health emergencies, and ultimately to be a pathway program into mental and behavioral health trauma careers, whether you want to be a trauma surgeon, a violence recovery specialist. But ultimately, for you all at home, the goal of that program was to leverage monies that were coming to trauma centers in a way that's meant to be in hospital. That's where most money from the NIH CDC sits when it comes to violence. It's coming through these trauma centers that are level 1, but they're not doing as much preventative work pre-injury. All that money, the mechanism is tied up for once someone is shot or injured due to trauma. Now they can get all these to spend tens and thousands of dollars on a young man who's already shot someone or has been shot, versus doing preventative work, which is far cheaper in the schools where they're spending most of the time. So that's what Trap Violence is. And I'll say the third thing that I would leave is that the sports, to bring sports full circle. One thing that we realized when starting this organization is that, experience trumps all, and people who are good at doing what they're doing should keep doing it. And you have to follow the path of least resistance, meaning that when we wanted to get into schools, it was so difficult to get in the public school system where most of our kids are. They're protected. There's bureaucracy. There's administrative overhaul. I know Dale deals with this all the time. It's probably one of the reasons why the conference is on like weekends and stuff like that, not at a school during the school day, because there's red tape around it. Even when you went to the school, even though you know everybody back there, you know the teachers, you know the coaches. So we found out that sports programs were the back doorway into getting access to our most at-risk youth. So my sports MedKeep programs are a violence prevention initiatives to keep kids off the streets by making youth contact sports safer, like football, boxing. And so we teach all the same things in MedKeep and Trap Violence. We just do it in the sports context so that parents will put their kids there, keep them off the streets, and it'll be their salvation like me. And our newest program connects all the dots. So Sneakers to Scrubs is a program that comes out of sports that solves the big problem of lack of Black men in medicine that we even have struggled with in my pathway pipeline programs. So even when I'm dedicated as a Black man to go get more Black men in our programs, we may only have 5 to 10 in a program of 40 students. That are all Black and Latino, that you can only get that many men. And before that, there were 1 and 2 before I took over some of these programs or started my own. But now with the Sneakers to Scrubs program, I'm taking former pro athletes who are Black male medical students, like Myron was, like myself was as a high college athlete. And we're taking them and we're using them in our sports programs to directly pull these young Black men into our medical pathway programs, like instant enrolls, the same way we treat Black girls in STEM, the same way we say, hey, we don't care if you want to be an engineer or not. We're going to expose you to engineering because we need you so bad. That's how we're doing with Black men in medicine. And in the first 2 months of these young men, and with Jamil Alusa and Marcus and Lord at 2 medical schools at UChicago and Rush are involved in this, these group of 7 to 8 young Black men who are former college athletes and pro athletes have tripled the amount of Black men in our HPREP, SNMA HPREP program, which is Health Professions Recruitment and Exposure Program. That program that's run by SNMA, and these are SNMA students, literally went from having about 6 in last year's class to about 20 in this class. So you're talking about tripling the rate of these Black men who are finished because they're athletes. And guess what? These were the strongest students, some of them in the actual cohort in general. So these were the ones answering every question. These were the ones in the cadaver lab at our medical school that were the first to put their hands in the body. What is this, a heart? This is a lung, when maybe someone else was stepping back. And back to a full circle on about being him. For those of you all, being these kind of leaders amongst your peers, athletes naturally have that, and they don't have an apprehension. So we would notice prior cohorts that the black men would always be reserved. They'd always be kind of off in a corner because there were so many young black women, and these were used to being a smart black dude, right? But what we were seeing is that with the athletes, it completely shifts everything to a much more gender balance, a much more, aggressive approach in terms of learning styles and in terms of who's going to be the first to volunteer to do something, to take a blood pressure, to teach CPR. These young men were doing it, and it brought that out of these other young men. So these other recluse young men who were just sitting there quiet, the moment that these athletes started coming week 2, they started blossoming. They started, preparing more, participating more, and it broke up the gender cohort. So meaning that before, you see all the young men kind of group with the young men. You see all the women in their different little cliques based on what schools they went to or what they liked. When the young men who were athletes came through, their first thing was like, yo, Dr. Pratt, can we stay together? Because, we play sports together. Can we keep the same lab groups? And I was like, y'all do whatever y'all want to do. I don't care as long as y'all show up to do what y'all got to do. They saw the young women in the cohorts. And they came to me after that first session, was like, yo, D, I think we cool to mix it up a little bit. And young ladies were accepting of that too. So I think that the learning lesson is that being yourself, being, proactive, not having imposter syndrome, and aggressively approaching medicine, learning as hard as you can, staying late, getting that extra rep, right? Like being able to say, I want to try this again. Can I try blood pressure again? Can I try IV insertion one more time to see if I can get it a little bit better? That's what has been a big deal. And we want to grow that nationally. These young men are going to be stars. You're going to hear their name. Their social media in the first couple months has blown up and gone viral. And we want it not to be something that's kept just for us. We're not doing this for branding or for t-shirts. We're doing it because we want it to be a model that any city can take and say, well, who are our men in medicine that are physical therapists, that are doctors, surgeons, nurses, whatever, that started out as athletes? How do we use that to go back and keep that same hierarchy that we know is real, where athletes are listened to? Their lives, their personal businesses are social media topics number 1. So why not use them in a way that's still struggling to even matriculate into medicine?
Man, I love that. I love that. I sent it to you in message. I got to connect you with my guy Reginald Miller also, because they're doing something similar on the East Coast. But I love that journal. It's very intuitive. It all makes sense. All makes sense. Yeah. What are the socials for those programs? The handles for those programs?
For Sneakers to Scrubs, we'll go backwards. You can go to their Instagram, their TikTok at Sneakers to Scrubs. You can go S2S, either or. It'll pop right up for you. For MedKeep, you can go on, whether it's our website is just medkeep.com. That's MEDCEEP. That's our website. You can reach out to us. You can donate to us through there. You can specify what you want that donation to be for. Hey, I want this young black man to get an iPad or something like that, whatever it is. But then all of the rest of our information can be found through there. If you look at institutionally, you can go to University of Chicago's homepage. Just search my name up, Dr. Pratt or Pratt, and you'll see a lot of the things that we do, but mostly connect. We're approaching this from a humble point of view of a grassroots. Everything we do is authentic. It's straight out the mud. So if you want to work with those in the worst of worst conditions, which is what equity is supposed to mean, then connect with us. Find a way. Tell us about things that are going well where you're at, and we're happy to adapt and to partner and to do whatever it takes to really help our streets out.
I love it. I love it. Love it. Last question for you here, then I'm going to have you say one thing. If you had to go back and either repeat your MCAT year, so the years of studying and doing that, or repeat your intern year, which would you choose and why?
Intern year, most certainly. Intern year, 100%. Intern year, because every low had a high. I was able to probably have the best arc of my career as an intern. I went from being the runt of my class with the least emergency medicine experience. And we didn't talk about this, but I was forced into emergency medicine by the great, illustrious Dr. Bill McDade. Give him credit for that. He's the GOAT here in Chicago for us. Also was in Black Men, White Coats movie.
My guy, man.
Yeah,
that's my
Bill,
guy. You got an episode. Y'all go back and listen to this episode too. Okay. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about it.
So
Tell us that.
So intern year was crazy because at finishing med school, I was trying to become a family medicine sports doc. I was trying to do this community and sports balance, the work what I'm kind of doing now. And I remember sitting with Bill, who was the only reason why I even got into medicine. He ran all the programs at U Chicago at that time before he became the double AMC inaugural DHE&I chair. But before that, he had these programs. So every step he was encouraging me. I was his guy. He was coaching me. Even when my brother got murdered, Bill was the first call that I got. You know, he called me saying, yo, you know, he didn't even say condolences. I think he just jumped straight into, you got to use this. I'm in tears, still weeping. This is an hour or two after I found out. I'm in my parents' home, right? And literally, I don't know how he found out, calls me, yo, you got to use this to make sure other people don't go through what you're going through. And I know that's a weird thing to say. I know everybody else saying they're sorry and condolences. That's not my job. I'm coming here to make sure you remember this down the future. So you can see what kind of guy Bill is, right? Like youngest dude to get an MD, PhD, right? From our institution, really to go from the streets of Chicago.
I'm gonna
When
echo that. So it's for the listeners, so y'all really get it's not
hear
just
that, yeah,
he's legit. He's like the Godfather, like maybe one of the smartest dudes. Just sit down and talk to him. He's legit, legit.
and
If y'all
he's
don't believe
from
us, y'all go watch. Go by the way, y'all go watch our documentary. It's free. So what is it? Members.bmwcevents.com. Go watch the Black Men and White Girls documentary,
yeah.
and just listen to this dude, Dr. McDade, talk, man, and then you'll see exactly what Dole was talking about.
Yeah, so now if you can imagine, this is my number one mentor. I'm needing letters of rec going into residency. And so I save everything because he's the main mentor. He wants to see what everybody else puts together in your app, and then he'll do his part last, right? He'll whip that together quick. So he's like, all right, give me all this stuff. And he's the one who taught me even how to do all these things, right? So literally, I'm bringing him my app, and he's there to write my letter of rec for family medicine. And he's like, oh, okay, I see you did this. Look like you honored in emergency medicine. You just fought for this trauma center thing, right? You just had a big win after fighting for a level 1 trauma center, and you never thought about emergency medicine. And I was like, no, I'm doing this family thing. I've been focused on community medicine and sports. So I'm like, Bill, I don't want to hear it. Like, this is too late in the game. And he was like, nope. And he just rips up my letter of rec. All the notes that he had, he ripped it up, and he was like, you're going to do emergency. It's going to be better for you. All the things you want to do, you'll have better life balance time. You'll be able to protect your job better from mid-levels, nurse practitioners, all those things. But most importantly, you'll have time to advocate. You'll be able to schedule your structure to go to DC to go advocate. You'll be able to be in the community because you're an ER doc. And he was like, the best part of all is you'd be able to speak louder than anyone on any issue. Meaning that if it's drugs, who's going to speak louder on drugs in your community than the ER doc? If it's violence, who's going to speak to that? If it's child abuse, if it's maternal fetal mortality, you're going to see the most pregnant first trimester bleeders and that are being abused by their husband or by their boyfriends or their baby daddies every day. So he convinced me that day I had to, and that was 3 days before my residency application was due. I had to redo a whole app in 3 days to get into emergency medicine. And I'll keep the rest of the details quiet for having someone who can play the who you know game and can tell you some secrets
Oh
about what
yeah.
not. He was like, don't do an away because you're going to be weak at an away right now. Do your home institution rotation where you built up social capital. You're switching into emergency medicine. Yes, you honored the internal rotation, but if you were to go do an away, you'd probably not do well right now. You're coming off a year off of medicine. Just ride your paper app and the connections that we got because you're gonna be a star. So I'm gonna sell you as the goods. So I came in as the runt of emergency medicine as an intern, you all. So I came in with very little experience. And in that year, myself and Dr. Garth Walker, he was the other African American male in our class from Chicago. We also had a man by the name of Dustin. Dr. Harris, he was there as well. But the only 3 of us, right, out of 16. But myself and Garth were both Southsiders, and we both were coming in as kind of runts. And Garth is a star now as well. If you all don't know who Garth Walker is, look him up. I mean, he's the boss of bosses. He's the yin to my yang in every way that would make me better, right? But we went through together as former athletes. He played college football as well. He also played basketball. And we went through and we kind of just worked our way up as people who had low experience, had a ton of imposter syndrome. And the same things that I would be doing on the community level, he'd be focused on the systems research level. And so everything where I was strong, I would be like, hey, Garth, I'll help you there. Where he was strong, he'd be like, no, bro, let me help you here. and we got through. But intern year was exceedingly difficult. But coming out of intern year, I was able to go into my second year and go from being the runt to being asked to be chief resident and being able to turn it down and say, I'd rather focus on being the community chair and doing what I'm doing. And literally people saying, no, you were voted in as chief, even though you didn't put your name in the hat. So in 18 months, that was my arc of intern year into that point.
Man, I love that. I love that, man. What an overall amazing story, man. You know, going to the med school you chose after you were enrolled in another one, so that was a last minute decision.
Absolutely.
ER last minute decision. You know, God working, man. I love it. I love it. I love it. All right. Hey, so let's wrap this up here. To the listeners, I want to remind you guys to make sure you hit that subscribe button. Two things are going to happen here in a second, right? Well, the first thing is hit that subscribe button. Go ahead and do it right now. Do it right now. Second thing is, so if you're watching this on YouTube, right, if you're listening to it, make sure you watch it on YouTube. Also, subscribe to our channel, right? It's going to see some videos around here. YouTube is showing you these videos because YouTube knows what you like. So just showing you these videos because they think you're going to like these next videos. Go ahead and click on it. Keep on watching our stuff. And let's end this. Dr. Pratt, I'd like for you to say, my name is Dr. D. Abdullah, Dr. Dola, however you want to say your name, Pratt, and I am a black man in a white coat.
I'm Abdullah Hasan Pratt, aka D, and I am a black man in a white coat.
Stop playing around. Really got them racks, ain't playing around.